with who we all have in mind. So a quick clip of a few patients with one of the chronic diseases that we are all taking care of. So let's see if it's going to work. If we may play.
Sometimes if I use my inhaler when I'm on the go and I'm in a rush, I can notice a difference as if I'm not using it correctly and not getting enough.
When I was first prescribed, I felt I was using my inhaler correctly because I followed the directions. But as time went by, I wasn't really sure.
I forget to take my inhaler just as the course of the day. Sometimes you'll take a look at the clock and realize an hour or two went by and you're already at the next dosing. And sometimes I would end up missing a dose.
You do forget. You forget to use your inhaler, you know, on those days when you feel like you're okay, and then you're not. Every month I go for a consultation, and it's just a matter of keeping track of when I was having symptoms, how often I used my inhaler. That's maybe the last thing on your mind is to write it down.
I think managing my asthma would probably be a lot easier if I kept better records of it.
I see my pulmonologist unless I'm having a real problem about every 6 months. And I don't remember from month to month what I've experienced. And I generally talk to him about what I've experienced in the last week.
He tells you about all kinds of things, but it's hard to really just remember those. You get home and it's like, what was all that he just said?
So my name is Yechiel Engelhardt. I'm the head of digital health for Teva Pharmaceuticals. And 6 years ago, this was the first time I was here in CES. I had a tiny booth in the startup pavilion with a company called Gecko Health. I had asthma patient in mind. We built a company around their needs. And a couple of years later, we joined Teva as part of an acquisition. And currently, I'm managing digital health. So I asked myself when I need to come here, now after a couple of years in Teva, what do I, as an entrepreneur, have to do with one of the largest and oldest generic companies in the world, Teva Pharmaceuticals. How do I, as someone that always was in healthcare and always kind of was involved with new technologies, can really provide my own ambition to change healthcare with a pharmaceutical company, and why a pharma company need actually to be here in the Consumer Electronics Show. So let's start with some of the kind of where we are today. So pharmaceutical company, and especially generic drug companies, are under a lot of pressure. You see some of those are different shares price. We are completely rely on IP that change all the time. We have more and more pressure on the drug price. We have new FDA processes that make it even harder to have the drug in the market for longer. So this is where we are today. Now, 3 years ago, again, here in the CES, I sat for lunch in the Venetian with one of the executives, and he told me then that we need to start thinking on how do we make revenues outside of the drug that we are know to do so well. He said the industry gonna change, and if we're not gonna do it, we're gonna lose. We're gonna be behind. And he was so right. He mentioned mostly retail and PBM, and we know that today those are the new players. Those are players that we as a pharma company we were never thought about as someone that might be part of the game. We know Amazon, the most known secret, that they want to change completely the way that we're going to consume drugs virtually and maybe even physically with Whole Food. We know that CVS and Aetna is changing the value chain. Now we can have the payer, the PBM, and the service, the real service in the clinic, all in one place, provided in a much more convenient way. And Apple shows for the last couple of years more and more interest to get into this industry. Currently, what we know they're trying to do as part of kind of introducing them to EHRs is to be the first monitor to almost anyone in the health industry, to the patients, to the doctor, and we see more and more as part of this. So We know the technology companies are moving into it, and we as a pharma company, way behind. Now, it's not like we are the most advanced industry. Those are real pictures. So this is 1930. This is one of the first factories of Teva in Israel, in Petah Tikva. And this is when I joined Teva in 2015. I took this picture because I was just amazed. There was a projector and a VCR. So this is not Google. It's not there anymore. I just checked a couple of weeks ago. But this is it's an old industry. We try to not to make too much changes. We try to be very cautious, not to introduce any product before it's fully validated. We have all the different regulatory aspects. Even when it comes to pricing, we are very cautious about changing the business model. So this is the kind of industry that now we need to try to see if we can innovate, if we can be part of this new game. Now, although we are not a new industry, there are so many different opportunities today to get into how digital and technology can support us. And those are just a few. There is an opportunity to get into operation and supply by knowing exactly when a drug is being consumed and by whom and where. There are opportunities with R&D by providing better information on the patient in real time in clinical trial. One of the things that we hear more and more is about developing new drugs based on the data that we have for years and years about our patients. We have all the apps and software that we are discussing here to support a patient beyond the pill. We have new models that are based on the data that we have to create this value-based model. So those are all the different opportunities. But when we bucket them, in order to kind of start looking where we want to start, this is kind of where we see ourselves today. So there are big 4 buckets. There is the digital operation, new supply chain, new operation based on data, based on technology. There is new business model. Again, it's the value or outcome-based that we can now, based on the data that we collect from the patient. The new R&D processes, and the consumer health, what we are focusing here today. And for me, as someone that comes from a small company that focuses mostly on the patient, and then when I joined Teva, realizing that Teva has the same kind of vision, let's start from the patient, let's try to see how we can put him in the center, I'll try to focus today on the digital consumer health and some of the models. But what you'll see that the pharma industry are naturally going more and more into the digital R&D. I just came back from JPM. Everybody was just talking about how digital and R&D can change the pharma industry. Because we now, again, we can find new drugs in a better way, faster way. So this is where most of the pharma companies are going. We try, besides the digital R&D, really see if we can make a difference in the consumer health. And this is the focus of today. Now, we have a problem. There are so many options, but you see what you see here, this is basically taking from Google the amount of discussions on digital health and pharma in the last couple of years. They will see there was a kind of a peak in 2014 and then kind of a plateau over the years. There are also the headlines here from the news that look exactly the same for the last couple of years and some product that got introduced, but in the end of the day, what you will hear if you kind of walk with some of the executive in pharma is this sentence. We tried it before and it never worked. This is kind of what there is a feeling now with this kind of level in the industry that there is still not real ROI. There is really no real business model that can help the pharma industry when it comes to the consumer digital health. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we can really make it happen. So as a company, we have a lot of different ways that we make a decision where to start. Those are just a few of those that I thought it's important to mention. So the first kind of parameter before we started now to decide where are we going, where we want to invest, what we're going to implement first, was the ability to really understand the problem. So it was a must to choose a drug or disease area where we already are players. We understand the patient, the doctors, what are the gaps, what are the needs today. Second is to make sure that by having this connected and technology and having the information, we can make an impact, both economical, clinical impact, And the last is about the quality of life. Again, we're going back to the patient. We want to make sure that the patient really going to see a difference, and not just the patient, but the community around them, the caregivers, if it's the family, and see that we can really make a change for the entire value chain. So for us, it wasn't easy, but in the end of the day, we chose asthma as the first disease. Teva is a player in asthma for many years now. We understand this market. We understand the current solutions. It's a big, big and expensive market. And the changes in this market was minimal for the last 30 to 60 years, depends how you look at it. It's one of those diseases that you'll see 20% of the patient basically causing the 80% of the cost. So we know where to focus. We know those patients are the most important. This is where we need to start. The next part, as I mentioned, we want to understand what are the needs, where are the gaps. So we have numerous studies during the year about inhaler technique, about how doctors make the clinical decisions, and in the end, what is the kind of control level that we achieve today as part of the current treatment. And those are the numbers, and those are the same numbers you can find not just for the last 10 years. Those are 30 years numbers. For 30 years, we see that patients do not know how to use their inhalers. 50%, only 50% of the patients are using their inhalers correctly. Second is the information flow. So when a patient goes to a doctor and say, I'm under control, 70% of the time, this is not the actual case, and only 50% are actually staying at home without relapse. So we know that there is a real gap. So next question, if we can change something by having more information, by collecting and connecting those patients. So this is an old study. This is from 1999, and they show back then, by collecting very simple 3 parameters, the lung function, if the patient woke up at night, and when they used the inhaler, they found that 10 days before an exacerbation, they already started to see changes. This is huge for us now. We can now take this information and maybe help a patient before they reach the hospital. Now, this is a lot of dots, but this is a fascinating study just recently in UK. Here, they use connected inhalers that can find when the patient uses it and the technique. So what you see here, this is a 20-year-old female with severe asthma that used her inhaler the right way, morning and night. This is the yellow dots. But the yellow is the wrong technique. Only the green one is the right technique. So you see, when she goes to the doctor after 6 months, and she said, my lung function are a red zone all the time, I have relapse, what the doctor will do is change prescription, add a dose, add more medication. But actually, this patient, all she needed is just better education. And we can know about it almost immediately after a few weeks if we had this information available by connecting those inhalers. So, wow, we can change their life without going to a doctor. We can start impacting those patients immediately. This is another quick case. You see, this patient came after 6 months. He told the doctor, I mostly feel well, but then still I have those relapses. I use it every day, I promise you. But what you can see here is the case of many patients. They feel well, and they stop using the medication, and then they feel bad again, and they keep using the medication. Those cycles. So this patient is a classic problem with adherence. And again, if we had this information available in real time, we can start to influence and change the life of this patient. So with all this information, we realized that there is something that we can do here. So one of the things we did a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, this is where I joined Teva. Teva acquired Gecko Health, which is a system that can cover most of those points. We have the ability to have information from the inhaler, help the patient by understanding the important use of the drugs, send this information to doctors, to healthcare providers, and have more and more information basically to try to achieve what I just mentioned. So we started with this, and this was one of the first cases. And in order to build it As a small startup joining a large pharma company, we're trying to implement what we learned about how you build a good consumer product. So we implement different parameters that you see today on every device that you walk in the exhibition. Those are some of the basic ideas of how you build a good product for a consumer. It needs to be very easy. It needs to be trustable. When I say trust, it's meaning that you let this device to do things for you without checking after this, like you have your GPS in your car. No one assumes that the GPS will take you to the wrong side of the town. We know that sharing today is an important part of having this kind of sense of community around the product and engagement. Not just engagement in the sense of engage the patient, but keep the patient engaged more than the 3-6 months that we know today that this is kind of the cliff where patients are stop using it. Specifically for us, we realize that we need to make sure that it's part of some of the system that we built around it. So I'll show you in a second. One of the studies that we have is with the NHS in UK, and we learn a lot, and we need to make sure that we really follow all those different parameters. We added an ease by providing a nurse in the clinic that can support the patient if they have any question. We provided it was not Teva communicating with the patient, we work with the third party, and we work with the nurses that can work with the patient, that they already trust them, and they know that this product is coming from a system that they're familiar with. We build a share system where the patient can share this information with their caregivers, their family, and the doctor, of course. And then engagement. We try to personalize it as much as we can. As a company, we started with a full-fledged game. This was 7 years ago. During the years, we changed, and now we kept some of the gamification part of it to build some kind of ongoing engagement and achievement as part of the process of keeping the patient in the system. So this is a quick clip, if we can play.
I was invited to come into my local doctor's. They gave me 2 little devices to put on the end of my asthma inhalers and connected them both up to my phone so that I get notifications at certain times of the day to remember to take my inhalers, and it also records when I take certain ones, and therefore if it becomes an issue they can contact me. I now remember to use my brown inhaler a lot more than I did before, whereas I would go like years without using my brown inhaler because I just forget and not deem it important. But now it just reminds me to use it twice a day, every day, and just keep on the actual program.
I would hope that in the long term it would be really useful, particularly at annual asthma reviews, to be able to use the data about a patient's compliance with their preventer inhalers and their use of a reliever.
So now we have mountains amount of data. So we are very proud in the partnership we announced 2 years ago with Watson Health. And it's not just about how we manage the data and we use it, and the ability of what I showed you before to now start to learn how we can predict those exacerbations, those relapses before they happen. It's more also about the other pieces of information that we collect. So we learned that just by having the inhalers, it's a lot, but we can also learn just from claims that the patient had before, other drugs that the patient is using, refill from other databases, location of the patient, the weather, and so on. And those are all pieces of information that now we collect together to build those models that will help us eventually to understand the patient better, to have better engagement, and if we can prevent and predict, this is really where we want it to be in the next couple of years. So taking all of this into what we are today was a long process. And those are some of the key elements that what we learned in the last 2-3 years that are important to, I believe, anyone that's going to want to work with pharmaceutical company or need to understand what does it mean for a large company like Teva to make this change. So first is the digital foundation. When you work with the pharma, you assume that they have the same level of technology of some of the companies that you in technology. We needed to build a whole new cloud-based system that would just not exist there. So it was a decision that started from making what solution we want, building a completely new architecture. When we look about pharma, as I mentioned before, there's all those different buckets, and we need to make sure that we can support all those buckets that eventually we will use. Next is the R&D versus software development. Pharma companies are working in the most, I would say, the definition of waterfall. There is no movement before everything is getting done. And it needs to be approved, and it needs to be going into documentation and with different regulatory bodies. And we look at cycles of software, we know we need to be very agile and quick, and it's going to change over the time. So it took us more than 2 years to build processes that can combine those two together, because we're not just building a software and these devices separately. What we really want to do is trying to build something that can work together and come to the market in cycles that then we can keep building and have those life cycle over the year. New metric and processes. So this is the first time we were in Teva needed to face those challenges of how we bring those other parts in the company, like the medical part and pharmacovigilance and regulatory and legal, together to support something they never heard before about, which was a software-based solution. We decided to build a dedicated organization. You'll hear it a lot. There is a whole debate if it needs to be under IT or separated. We decided to build one organization that will deal with digital health, including the marketing and the commercial part. So now we have all the value chain from building the product to selling the product in the market. And we also need to understand it's not just privacy with data. It's the first time that we have information from the patient that we need to sometimes report in real time. So if you are a technology company and we know that the patient report a headache in the phone, it's just going to go as part of the system. For a pharmaceutical company, this might mean that we need now to report to the FDA. So we need to build a whole automated system about reporting. The last part is the business model. We have so many questions around business model. You'll hear about outcome-based, value-based. What we learned in the last couple of years that the market is still, I would say, very early in this process of adopting value-based payment system. And there are so many different stakeholders that can benefit from this. So what we decided is to really go back to the same way that we are selling drugs today. We bake into the system the value that we create through the connectivity, through the digital system, and now we can go back to the payers without those other additional services and other database payment system that we might see in other systems. Almost done, Jill. Last one. I apologize.
No, I'm sorry. I got to do what I got to do.
Okay. No, that's fine. So this is the summary. This is the 5 topics that what we learned and what I want you to take. First, technology is not just nice to have. You'll see a lot of apps today that are just kind of wrap around the drug. We really believe that it needs to be part of the model, and this is where we see pharma companies are going. It's part of the business model of selling drugs. Innovation and market entry is important, and we'll see small companies that can really start playing the platform. It's going to be only 2 or 3 platforms, as we know, and there is a chance here for small companies to go and really define how the market is going to look like in the next couple of years. The value chain, we saw before, there is pharmaceutical companies have a lot of opportunities to kind of make an impact because we touch every part from the manufacturing all the way to the patient. Technology is fast, but not as fast as executive will think, so we need to make sure that we convince the management that sometimes technology adoption is going to take years, almost like drug implementation. And the last, and in this summary, we saw today, and we saw it in the last 2 days, partnership is a key. We don't want to build everything by ourselves. We have the relationship with IBM. We actually have a relationship with American Well, and we want to continue with partnership. We believe this is actually where the market gonna be in a couple of years. I work in this industry for over 15 years now, and I think that we are in an amazing time right now, and pharma companies has a great chance to change the way that we treat our patients. Thank you very much.